We are going to get recording. We will get this show on the road. A few quick housekeeping things. So who we are with Purdue Extension, I'm sure a lot of you know who we are, but just in case some of you don't, we provide relevant and research-based educational services to Marion County residents and organizations who share our passion for building young leaders, creating strong families and healthy communities, developing profitable businesses and trusted employees, and growing a vibrant natural environment. And we also are making every effort to reach every part of our community at large. We do this by increasing our outreach and partnerships with various communities in the town. We would like to ensure representation and full participation of diverse voices. And we try to instill a trusting culture in our office through the words we say, the actions we take, and then in the general goals that we set for ourselves. A quick plug, it is fair time. I hope to see everybody out at the Purdue Extension Marion County Demonstration Garden. The pictures you see here are out of date by just a couple of weeks, and you would not believe the difference we have out there now. We have a beautiful showing this year. If you're unfamiliar, we are located let's say, to the east, I believe, of DNR. So if you're familiar with the DNR building, we are kind of behind that. If you are familiar with the Fish Guy, we're right next to him. A true staple of the Indiana State Fair, the Fish Guy. Who am I? In case you don't know me, I see a lot of familiar names out there, but in case you don't know who I am Carey Grable. I am the home horticulture educator for Purdue Extension, Marion County. A little bit about my educational background and my work experience. I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Kentucky. I got my master's degree from Murray State University. I spent about 9 years as a nursery crop consultant for the University of Kentucky. I did a lot of research on nursery crops, trees, shrubs, that kind of thing, and did some consulting as well. We moved to Indiana when my wife took a position with Butler University, and I spent a few seasons as a section grower at a local wholesale greenhouse. Got a lot of experience with annuals in that position for sure. And then when Steve Mayer, my predecessor, retired, I came running. I am happy to be back in Extension. Extension is my passion. It has been my career, and I love everything about it. So who am I to talk about pesticide application? So I like to give you my chemical credentials, as I call them. Like I said, I spent a few seasons working as a section grower at a production greenhouse. We had 5 acres under plastic and an additional 10 acres of mum production outdoors. If you are unfamiliar with commercial greenhouse production or the process that it takes to produce a greenhouse crop, I will tell you that there is a lot of chemical involved in that process. We have a lot of very juicy, delicious plants all tightly bound together, and it is just a buffet for any insects that may choose to dine there, or any plant diseases as well. And also there's a lot of plant growth regulator chemical that is used to create the plants in the form that we love them. So some of these plants that you are purchasing at your end garden center may not naturally grow in the way that you purchase them. We may use a plant growth regulator to keep them small and compact. So a typical week for me in this position, lots of chemical application, like I said. So we would spend typically 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock watering and, deadheading, that kind of thing. And then the chemicals came out. So there on the right, you kind of see an example of our weekly to-do list that we would have there in the greenhouse. We had hormones, like I said, the plant growth regulators. We released biological controls. So we used predatory insects to come in and kind of eat up some of our insect pests. We had fungicides, insecticides. During the down season, we had herbicides to keep weeds from popping up in the structures. So we did a little bit of everything. We had multiple different methods by which we did the chemical application. We had traditional pneumatic 100-gallon sprayers, so we certainly did large volume sprays. We also had interesting technologies like a fogger. So in an effort to use fewer chemicals, less harsh chemicals, and maybe less expensive chemicals, we would fog the chemicals through this, basically a jet on a cart. And that way we were spending less time out there slinging chemicals around. So you have a garden and you want to know, okay, how do I make that decision to go out there with chemicals? Is that my first step? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about plant pathogens and how a disease may develop in the first place. So for a plant disease to develop, 3 components are necessary. There needs to be an infectious plant pathogen. And again, we say plant pathogen, this could also refer to insects. You need to have a plant that is susceptible to the pathogen, and you need to have an environment for the pathogen to infect and cause disease. And then naturally, time has to be present for the development of that disease to take place. A few glossary terms there for you if we want to further define these things. A host would be the living animal or plant on which a parasite, pest, or pathogen lives. And then a pathogen is an organism that causes infectious disease. This could be fungi, oomocytes, bacteria, viruses, viroid, virus-like organisms, phytoplasmas, protozoa, nematodes, parasitic plants, lots of options to choose from. So we got a lot of bad actors out there. And also, it's kind of important to note that a pathogen can be dormant until the appropriate conditions occur between a host and the environment. So that pathogen can be lying in wait, and all it needs is maybe a bit of wet weather to come along. And then all of a sudden, we have an outbreak. So we have a plant, we have a pathogen, we have noticed something is not right. How do we go about managing that pest? So first and foremost, we have to very correctly identify the pest. If we do not know what we're fighting, we cannot fight it. We're also going to have to make a decision. Is this problem big enough, bad enough to warrant me going in there and taking action? And then we're going to start coming up with a strategy. So we need to consider more than one control tactic. Do chemicals need to be your first control tactic? I would encourage not, particularly in the home garden. I feel like chemicals in the home garden are our last stop. So once we have developed a plan, we are going to apply control methods at the correct time. Timing is very important, and we're going to get on that a little bit later. And then once we have applied our control tactics, we are going to take a step back and we're going to evaluate what we've done. We have to say, was this effective? Did these control methods work in this situation? Because not every control method is going to work the same in every location. We got to ask ourselves when we're determining, what is wrong in the first place. Well, what's normal? So some plants like the sycamore tree here, to the uninformed, may appear abnormal if you're not familiar with the plant. So we have to know what is normal for that plant in particular. So it may appear that these white pines are dying, but to the trained eye, it's the older needles there that are turning yellow and dropping from these white pines. So even though white pines are an evergreen, and they provide color all year long, that doesn't mean that every individual needle on that plant is going to live forever. So evergreens do shed their older needles to make room for the new growth. So what makes them appear evergreen is that this is a cycle. This is always going on. And so just because there is the presence of these yellow needles does not necessarily mean that we have something wrong with that plant. So being informed about what is normal in that plant is key before we jump to control methods. And so that also means that we need to have knowledge of some of the things that can commonly go wrong with these plants. So if we have some idea of where to start in our diagnostic process, that will help us along the way. So integrated pest management. This is a very important term. I hope a lot of you my master gardeners out there in the audience can remember this term from your training. So IPM is a way to integrate the use of varied control methods. Home gardeners don't usually have a set acceptable threshold value that they can use to make management decisions. And because of this, decisions about how or if to manage a problem will vary from person to person. So everybody's going to have a different tolerance for issues. An individual's decision will be based on the damage that they will accept and the potential for the pest to cause more problems in the future. So again, breaking that down, integrated. So we're going to use multiple control methods. We're going to have that targeting the pest and determine if that insect or other pest is found as the cause of the specific problem. And then we're going to come up with some kind of management strategy that can help tackle that. And an important term there, let's take a step back and look at that management line there, because I think that's a very key thing. Management, it says here, manage the pest population at an acceptable level, not total eradication. Particularly in the home garden, we need to have a very clear idea of what our end goal in that management is. So realistically, with the chemicals and methods and things that we're going to have access as home growers, complete eradication may not be possible. And so we need, again, to manage the pests. We need to come up with ways to reduce the damage that they're causing, as opposed to setting our sights on complete and utter eradication of that pest. So as opposed to a chemical approach, there are other ways that we can kind of deal with some of these pests. The mechanical approach, hand picking or spraying water to remove pests, using barriers like mesh, net, screen, and then modifying the temperature humidity if you are dealing with like a home greenhouse or something like that, as well as aeration. So as a home gardener, the mechanical approach is a lot more appropriate than it would be for like a large scale garden or a large scale greenhouse production facility, because it's a labor intensive and costly, but typically our gardens are going to be much smaller places that we can typically employ these mechanical approaches. So a small number of insects can be removed and squashed and drowned and suffocated, and all these other methods that we have to get rid of them mechanically, as opposed to breaking out the chemicals. So don't be afraid to try that. There is the biological approach. So this is still a developing territory here, but Purdue does have a publication here, E92W, to learn more about natural enemies. Keep in mind that you need to do some research before you are releasing predatory insects in your garden. Please know what you're releasing in your garden, and please understand that bugs move. They're not necessarily going to stay directly on the plant that you have them sprinkled on when you get them. But read more about it. It is a very interesting thing. We utilized a lot of biological controls in the greenhouse where I worked, and we had a lot of success with them, and it provided quite a bit of reduced chemical use, having these competitive insects coming in and parasitizing or feeding on our pests. Okay, so let's say we now know our host. Let's now say that we know what the problem is, and we have determined that we have to use a product of some kind. How do we determine what we're going to use? Well, I encourage you to be familiar with the extension publications that are out there. If Purdue doesn't have it, I guarantee you one of our neighboring states will. We may not be very useful in going to Florida's extension service and finding their publications, or Texas or California or Hawaii. Please use a neighboring extension service that has an environment similar to ours, and utilize their recommendations. But if you go to Google and you type your problem and put Purdue Extension next to that in Google, you will probably find an article on that. So utilize the educational resources that are out there that provide recommendations on some of the chemicals that we can use for these problems. Also, don't be afraid to send a sample into the Purdue Plant Disease Diagnostic Laboratory. I have had a lot of success utilizing their service, and they will typically give us a recommendation on what to use, as well as confirming your diagnosis. So not only will they tell you what to do about the problem, they can help you determine what the problem is in the first place. We also offer in our office the Master Gardener answer line for problems to come into our email and our voicemail, and we can also help direct you to some of these educational resources. Okay, we're going to go through a plant label together. But I cannot stress enough that the plant label is the law. You do not use any product in any other way other than how the label tells you to use it. There's no stretching in any other way. The label is law. So we're going to start with the product name or the brand name. You need to be aware that the product or brand name can change from one year to another. So even if the name is the same, the products may look similar, but the active ingredient or even the product use may be different. So it is always a good idea, if you've had a chemical sitting on your shelf for a while, go ahead and do a search. Make sure that that label has not changed. Make sure that the recommendations on that dosage or anything like that has not changed. So product name. So pesticides are classified according to their function. So in this case, we have a herbicide. But for example, insecticides control insects, herbicides control weeds. Pesticide types are very important because each product will control only a certain type of pest. So you need to make sure that you choose and recommend the correct type of pesticide for the correct pest that you have in your garden. And here we have a table that is giving us a varying different kinds of pesticides. So you can see miticides for mites, for example. The fungicides are going to be controlling fungus. That makes sense. Rodenticide for rodents, that kind of thing. So for formulations, pesticides can come in liquid or dry materials, and sometimes they are available in both. So the liquids are emulsifiable concentrates, flowable liquids, gels, solutions, aerosols, or sprays. The dry can be dusts, granules, baits, and wettable powders. And sometimes when it comes down to deciding which formulation is correct for you, you may just think down the road of what equipment do you have available to you to apply these things, or what is your preference for how to apply these things. Going back to the label, we have the mode of action. So for our example here, for our herbicide example, this is a contact post-emergent non-selective herbicide. So what do those things mean? This means that this is a contact chemical. It means it has to have direct contact with the plant that you're trying to kill. So this is a herbicide, we're trying to kill a plant. If it were systemic, that means it would travel through the plant. However, this mode of action is on contact. So this is a post-emergent. So that means that this is not going to prevent new seeds from germinating. No new weeds coming up are going to be controlled by this. It means the plant already has to be up above the ground and growing for this product to have any effect on it. And it also says that it is non-selective. So that means we're going to be killing basically anything we put this thing on. So we have herbicides that will help control monocots or kill grasses, or we have herbicides that may kill dicots, which are non-grasses. This one, we're hitting everything. All pesticides can have varying modes of action. Pesticide mode of action is defined as how the pesticide kills or inactivates a pest. It is important to understand how the way that each pesticide attacks a pest, as this suggests the best way to apply it to reach and expose all the pests. Some pesticides may only touch the pest to be deadly. Others must be swallowed to be effective. So for some of our rodenticides or our insecticides, the pest may need to swallow the product in order for any control to happen. So again, Broad spectrum, it's going to kill a broad range of pests. It's usually referring to things like insecticides, fungicides, and bactericides. Contact poison, kills by coming in contact with the pest. Disinfectant is effective against a pathogen that has infected the crop. A germination inhibitor. So again, that is going to inhibit germination of weeds, fungal spores, or bacterial spores. Non-selective, kills a broad range of pests and or crop plants, usually in reference to herbicides. Nerve poison interferes with the nervous system function. Protectants protect crops if applied before pathogen infects the crop. Repellents repel pests from crop or interferes with pest's ability to locate the crop. Systemic is absorbed and translocated throughout the plant. So again, that goes back to what I was saying, that this is the product that's going to move throughout the plant and is kind of a counterpoint to the contact. And then stomach poison kills following ingestion. All right, active ingredients. If the product contains more than one active ingredient, it must also list the percentage of each active ingredient. The percentage can be listed as a percent by weight or as pounds per gallon of concentrate. This is something that is maybe sometimes more important than the brand name. Is we may be more interested in what is in this bottle as opposed to what brand or flag they're flying it under. So we have some products, we need to store them safely. So we're going to move into some of the safety things here. Every pesticide label will include a reminder to keep these products away from children. This statement is required on all product labels and must appear on the label's front panel. The child hazard warning appears on a separate line above the signal word. So again, these are harsh chemicals, they're dangerous. Keep them away from those who are sensitive. And again, here is an example of what that looks like on the label. Keep out of reach of children. So signal words, that is what we just were talking about. Signal must be printed on the label, and these words identify the relative toxicity of a particular product. The signal words in order of increasing toxicity are caution, warning, danger, and danger poison. So danger or danger poison, starting at the top, these are highly toxic. So this is adult, can be killed by a taste to a teaspoon. Warning, these are moderately toxic. Adult can be killed by a teaspoon up to 2 tablespoons. Caution or slightly toxic. Adult killed by an ounce or more than a pint. So these words can help you as the homeowner assess the toxicity of the product, and they have nothing to do with the effect on the pest at all. So just because it is a safer product does not mean it's less effective, nor does that mean that the more dangerous products are more effective. And there you see it on the label again. You'll notice that that all labels have signal words listed in Spanish as well. The toxicity of a pesticide is its capacity or ability to cause injury or illness. So how do researchers assign these signal words to products? A huge amount of testing is done. So this is a table that is taken from the Purdue Master Gardener Manual from page 529 for you Master Gardeners out there. And it, again, is going to help you define these signal words and tell about their relative safeties. So the directions for use. This is the largest part of the label section. They instruct the applicator about how to properly apply the pesticide and achieve the best results. This section provides information such as the rate of application, the sites the product is intended to protect, like aquatic or non-crop sites, wildlife habitats, crop sites, greenhouses, or home gardens, that kind of thing. It tells you which pests it controls. It gives you mixing directions and other specific directions related to applying the pesticide. In cases where the product is intended for use on crops or vegetables, so for those of us growing our veggies at home, the pre-harvest interval will be listed, and that'll indicate how much time must pass between applying the product and harvesting that crop in order to be consumed. And that'll help you avoid pesticide residues so that the crop will not exceed the maximum tolerance level for pesticide residues. On some label, there may be an REI or a re-entry interval, and that tells you how long it is safe for you to go back into that space after applying that chemical. Okay. We've worked our way up to the point where we are now ready to spray some chemicals. I want to talk about exposure. Again, none of this is meant to scare you away from using chemicals, but this is all about safety. Again, the topic for the day was about how to safely apply in the garden. So I want to talk about acute and chronic toxicity. Acute toxicity of a pesticide refers to a chemical's ability to cause injury to a person or an animal from a single exposure, and generally a very short duration. Acute toxicity is measured as the amount or concentration of a toxicant required to kill 50% of the animals in a test population. This measure is usually expressed as LD50, which means lethal dose 50, or LC50, which means lethal concentration 50. Researchers spend many hours performing studies of the acute toxicity during the product formulation. The acute oral, acute dermal, and acute inhalation studies evaluate systemic toxicity via the designated routes of exposure. The results of these acute toxicity studies must be known in order for the appropriate labeling language to be determined. So our exposure sites typically are through our skin, they are inhalation, they are oral, getting it in our mouth, and through the eyes. I must have left a slide out there, but chronic toxicity. Let's talk about that for a second. Chronic toxicity is repeated exposure. So this is not an acute exposure. This is something that can build up over time. If we're having repeated use of these chemicals and repeated exposures, this is the type of exposure that's going to build up to the problem as opposed to being a single application event. So how do we protect ourselves? Each label will list the required PPE for each product. PPE, personal protective equipment. So at the bare minimum, you are going to want long pants, a shirt with long sleeves, socks, and closed-toed shoes. If you are out putting out chemical, and I don't care how safe that chemical is, the bare minimum, and I will repeat that, long pants, long shirt, socks, and a closed-toed shoe. Never wear sandals when applying pesticides. Pesticide-resistant gloves may be recommended. And these are not your leather garden gloves. These are not like your woven garden gloves. These are going to be the gloves we're all familiar with. We've all just gone through COVID. We know what safe gloves are. Safety glasses may or may not be recommended to keep the chemical away from your eyes. So again, take the time if you're out there applying chemicals, protect yourself. Think about acute exposure and think about the repeated exposure. So be safe for every single application. When are we going to be applying these chemicals? The weather takes a huge role in this decision. No chemical applications should be done during the heat of the day. And I will repeat that. No chemical applications should be done during the heat of the day. The plant is already stressed. There's no need to apply an additional stressor to that situation. If we are putting chemicals on that leaf surface, if we are putting oils or anything like that that may magnify the sunlight or prevent the leaf or the plant from respiring, letting out gases, we're going to stress that plant unduly. So there's no need to do it during the hottest part of the day. Try to spray later in the afternoon. Another thing is, when is that chemical rain safe, or when does it need rain? So some chemicals may need a certain amount of time to pass before they can have a rain event happen on them without losing effectiveness. And then on the other hand, there may be chemicals out there that are water activated. I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of putting out my weed and feed on my lawn and then not having any rain for 3, 4, 5 days. Some of these products are rain activated. They need that rain to get it down to the soil, or they need that rain to help dissolve that granule. So read the label again, very important. Also, don't spray in the wind. That seems pretty simple, but sudden gusts happen. If a gust happens, wait for it to pass before we're spraying. Don't spray in the wind. Depending on our equipment that we're using, we may be able to come up with some kind of clever attachment that will help us protect against wind drift. I have found the very perfect cylinder that can attach to my my spray nozzle to help prevent that drift from happening. And then we need to think about pollinator safety with the weather. So hopefully, as a homeowner, we don't have to resort to using neonicotinoids, but we need to think about the pollinators out there if we are applying any chemical that may possibly affect them. If we are going to use a product that could potentially harm a pollinator, we need to use that product after dark. The bees go to bed just like we do. So that is what we did in the greenhouse. They are increasingly requiring that on neonicotinoid labels. It will say right there on the label that it is law. In order for you to use this product, it must happen after dark. Again, check your labels, but do what you can, be a part of that protection of our pollinators, if it could potentially harm the pollinators after dark only. So we'll talk a little bit about what kind of equipment we have available to us. Again, that's going to depend on formulation that we chose before. There are hand dusters and spreaders. There's shaker spreaders, there's drop spreaders and rotary spreaders, and these are all going to be used for our dry granular pesticides. We have hose end sprayers, brushes and sponges, trigger sprayers and compressed air sprayers. These are, again, all for our liquid pesticide formulations. Another thing that we need to think about for our equipment is the fact that we need to be careful about what we're putting in a tank. So equipment can be expensive, it can take up valuable storage space, but we need to be sure to have a dedicated sprayer for each type of herbicide. So if you have a tank that you use only for Roundup, that's great. But do not then put a selective herbicide in that same tank because you may very well be harming some of your plants that you're not targeting by using that broad range chemical in the same tank as you're going to use for your narrow application chemicals. So it is helpful to have separate sprayers for each different kind of chemical that you may be using. So maybe for insecticide and fungicide, the same thing could be true. You need to mark these things, label them so that there's no confusion. And then the same is true for your measuring utensils. So if we are using the same measuring cup for each individual concentrate that we're diluting, we could again have some contamination issues there that are unnecessary. So try and have separate measuring cups. In our chemical room at the greenhouse, we had just dozens and dozens of measuring cups. And even still, we did a ton of work to keep those things rinsed and cleaned. So concentrated products, if you're treating a very large area, concentrated products, may be the right choice for you. Luckily, concentrated pesticides do come in varying sizes as well. The overall goal is to have as little product left over at the end of the session as possible. So we need to be pretty accurate with our tank mixes. So if we're mixing up, hopefully we're not going to have half a gallon sitting around. Hopefully we have thought ahead about how much we need to spray that day, and we can then utilize that entire product. Otherwise, there are ready-to-use products that are out there. So the concentrated products, they may be less convenient, but they are less expensive per gallon. Preparation will include handling the product. That is important to keep in mind. And they may require additional equipment to apply. And then also you have to consider the storage of that product as well. So this is something I wanted to put in here just from my own personal experience. you need to rinse all of your equipment multiple times. And in this case, I'm going to talk about your measuring cups. So let's say we are using a concentrate and we are going to mix up, let's say, a gallon in one of our little tank sprayers. And let's say we're doing Roundup. This is our hypothetical situation. We're mixing up a gallon of concentrated of Roundup. So we are going to first make sure our tank is nice and clean. This should have been done after the last time we used it. But first, let's ensure that our tank is clean. We are then going to add some water into that tank. Let's say, if we're only making a gallon, let's do about a third of that gallon first. And then we are going to measure out that product into our measuring cup according to the label. We're going to pour that concentrate into our tank now. And now we're going to put water into our measuring cup and use that to fill the rest of our tank. We're going to use that rinsing action of that measuring cup to fill that tank. Please do not just put your rinse water down a drain or into a waterway or onto your grass or anything like that. You can rinse directly into your tank and fill your tank all the way up that way. And that way, any chemical concentrate that is left in that measuring cup is being diluted until it is negligible. And the more dilute that concentrate is, the safer it is for you. So we have we've measured our product according to the label, we've added the product to the tank, and we have rinsed our cup into the tank itself and repeated and repeated and repeated. So it is now time to spray. My biggest hint here, again, I hate to be a broken record, but some of the labels out there may have some advice on how they want you to apply that chemical. Not every label is going to have that, but it is always worth checking the label to see if there are any specific instructions on how to apply. Another thing I wanted to add from experience, coverage is key. So for chemicals whose mode of action is contact, this is hugely important. So things like fungicide, if we are spraying a fungicide protectively, we have got to reach all parts of that plant. We need to hit the top of the leaf. We need to hit the bottom of the leaf. We need to hit the stem. We need to hit everything above ground. Because if there's anything left unprotected and that chemical does not move around, if it's not one of those that moves throughout the plant, we have to give a full shield on that plant in order to protect it. Okay, so let's say that we have now reached the other side. Hopefully we have measured out and prepared the appropriate amount of chemical that we're not going to have anything left over. Now we clean and we clean and we clean and we clean. So post-spray, equipment should be rinsed before storing, obviously. So after you have fully sprayed out your chemical onto the target plant, you're now going to have to rinse that tank. But you can utilize that rinse water. So the first time we have refilled that tank in order to rinse it, I'm not just going to dump that out on the ground. I'm going to go back out into the garden with that tank of rinse water and put it onto a labeled plant, a plant that is on the label, and utilize that first rinse. And I may even do that for the second one. If it's a gallon, again, in our hypothetical situation, if it's a gallon, I may not fill it all the way up, with a gallon, but maybe I put a third of a gallon of water in there, shake it up, and then I'm going to go back out there and try to utilize that very dilute chemical that may be left in that tank. Ideally, triple rinse everything. Triple rinse is just my bare minimum. And again, please never dump anything into waterways or down the city drains or anything like that. This is important. I have talked in the past about keeping a garden diary, and your chemical application should be part of that garden diary. So in the past, I've told you that recording your successes and how you got them and recording your failures and how you got them is very important. But you also need to consider recording your chemical successes. What did you use? You need to know how much you used, on what date, when was it successful, how well did it work, that kind of thing. So that way you have a good record. And this is also a safety thing. If heaven forbid something bad has happened to you, you've developed some kind of chronic exposure, this is also a very important document that you can take to your doctor, and that can very much help them know what is going on with your problem here. So keep a diary of all chemical applications you do in your garden. Okay. We are at about 40 minutes of this presentation, so I'm going to go through some of the key takeaways real quick, and then I want to open it up for discussion. So again, we have to identify the pests correctly. We have to know what we're fighting. We need to understand a little bit about the life cycle of that pest and about where we're going to try to affect that life cycle. We're going to apply the recommended control at the recommended time. And we have to read and understand the label and instructions because, again, the label is law. We do not go off label. So let me allow participants to unmute themselves. So we can start a conversation if anybody wants to have a conversation. I'm not going to try and give any very specific chemical recommendations today. Again, I encourage you to go do some of that research yourself. I think if you're out in your garden using chemicals, you need to have done some homework before you do so. But if you have any questions about technique, any safety questions, anything like that, please feel free to ask them.
Hi, Carey. This is Brandon. I have one question about the triple rinse method for the sprayer applicator.
Sure.
When you go back and spray that diluted concentrate onto a labeled plant, if you spray that onto a plant that was previously that you previously sprayed, do you risk diluting the product that is already on the plant and reducing its efficacy?
Very good question. And I would actually try to avoid going back over the stuff I had just sprayed. So I will give you an example from a couple of weeks ago here in our demonstration garden. We had some broad mite on our eggplant. And so I decided to try and use a suffocant. It is a mineral oil. And so what I did is I mixed up my appropriate amount and I used it on my predetermined list of plants that I was going to go out there and hit. So first I walked around and I made a list of everything I wanted to hit with that suffocant. And then I did my spray, I hit everything correctly. And then I went and I put, like I said, about 1/3 of a gallon in there, shook it up, to try and rinse as much of that container as I could. And then I look at the label and I say, I've got some zinnias over here, and this mineral oil can act as a protectant against fungus on the zinnia. So I went over there and I hit the zinnia. So I did not go back to those eggplant to try and, like I said, dilute down some of that mineral oil I had just sprayed on them. I went to another product that I could potentially get a little protecting action out of that same product. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Mary.
Occasionally when I'm out and about, I will, say on a very windy day, drive past a yard or a church or something, and there are landscapers out doing their work for the day, and it's so windy, you know that they're not supposed to be spraying, but they are. And you have to close your car windows so that you can not smell it or be exposed. Is there some place to report things that are questionable on the use of pesticides in a home garden though? Or because I think there are regulations for license. Well, I don't even think the landscapers who use this are licensed. So I don't even know what products they're actually, you can't ever be sure what you're being exposed to.
Sure.
But is there a way to follow up on that?
Well, it's important to keep in mind that not every chemical out there requires a license for commercial use.
Yes.
So, while I am a licensed applicator for chemicals, the majority of the chemicals that I used at the greenhouse they did not require a private applicator's license. So, you know, it's always hard to know exactly what's going on in every situation that you see out there. I'm unsure if you are able to report things like that to the Office of the State Chemist, but that is the controlling body that, you know, oversees the applicator's license and things like that. In the home garden, that's a little bit even harder because, you know, the average homeowner is not going to have a license at all, and so they're using a chemical that I sincerely hope is not licensed, license required. You know, we really should be staying away from some of these harsher things in our home gardens. And in fact, if we are obeying that label, like we talked about repeatedly, you know, there is very, 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 very little restricted use chemicals that is labeled for home garden use. So I don't know, that may be something that you can take to the city or something like that, but I'm not aware of which governing agencies for home gardens in particular.
Thank you.
Carey,
Yes, Jim.
this is Jim Hillman,
Hey,
and
Carey?
I'm interested in knowing if there's any recent information on recommending glyphosate.
so I don't have that personally. I can certainly do some reading on that, but I know that situation continues to evolve, and that is why I don't have a good recommendation on it. Glyphosate is a bit of a moving target here lately as to what the recommendations are. But I will say that when it goes off label, we'll know about it. It'll be big news. You know, that's going to hit some major news there. But I would also personally expect that it will probably be rebranded. So we always associate the brand of glyphosate with Roundup. And once it goes off of that Roundup brand, I personally expect it'll just pick up another brand name and they'll continue to have it used. But, you know, we'll have to wait and see on that one.
Thanks.
Yep. Did I hear somebody else start to ask a question there?
Carrie, this is Susan.
Yes.
On the label, the herbicide label, it said herbicide EC. What does EC mean?
That is a formulation. So that is emulsifiable concentrate. And I'm not going to dig too deeply
On the
into that.
herbicide label?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I can back up to that one.
Okay.
Back up. Yes, herbicide EC. So typically when you see those different shorthand letters and things like that after a product, you will be referring to kind of what form that product is in. So I'm trying to think of some examples off the top of my head, and I'm kind of coming up blank, but yeah, those letters there typically refer to just the form. So what kind of liquid is that? So that emulsifiable concentrate, if I recall correctly, means that this is probably a product that was a solid that has been, again, made very, very fine and then suspended in a form, in a fluid. Well, I am going to,
Carey?
yeah, go ahead, Teresa.
Yes. In the, talking about the safety of equipment afterwards, what about the PPE? Because if you may have on the long clothes and boots and all of that, how do you handle that afterwards?
So the recommendation is that you will wash those in a machine, and they are safe to wash in your machines. but you will do them in a load unto themselves. You will not join that in with the family wash. So I will tell you from my own personal experience, having been a chemical applicator while I had both a pregnant wife and a newborn baby during that time, what we would typically do was, first of all, my shoes never entered the house. My spray shoes never entered the house. Second, my clothing went into the wash by itself, and we ran them and cleaned them. And then I would run a empty load after that load. So I have then again rinsed the machine an extra time as well. And we have thankfully never had any crossover contaminant issues, but the recommendation generally given is do not mix in your spray clothing in with the rest of your laundry. Do that onto a load itself.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody coming today. Again, I hope everybody can make it out to the fair. It is beautiful out here and lots of good food out here. I've already been perusing the fair food, so come out and have some fun. If you have any questions on this, let me know. If I don't know the answer, I probably know the guys who do. So we'll get you any answers, anything that you have. So again, thanks for coming. I'm going to stop my screen share here. And I'm going to end my recording.